Hi, guys. Welcome back to Mind and Seek. Thanks again for joining me today. What we'll do is we'll talk about two different concepts, one being control and the other one being logic, and we will blend these concepts together. So let's begin with control. So when we think about control, we get this idea of comprehension, having a hands-on approach to life. So for instance, when we feel like we could take control of our everyday scheduling, we could take control of our children's lives, we could take control of our identity, it brings us a peace of mind, right? And that feels good. So this is what we control on the external. But we tend to confuse this with our whole entirety, right, of our whole human existence. What the ego does is it basically projects this identity, pretending that it's you and I, pretending it's Sarah, pretending it's Ted and Samantha, which is furthest from the truth, right? What the ego projects is not the authentic you. But for us, we become a little bit more relieved when we know that, hey, if we could be in charge of something, it doesn't necessarily matter if we could look internally. And that is the big issue here. Because we are so focused on the exterior, we hardly ever take time to look at the interior, to really delve deep inside and figure out who the real self is. And I talked about this in my previous video, the capital self, the real authentic self. So let's take the iceberg analogy. So as you know, the top of the water, you see the iceberg, which is 10% of it. However, below the surface is majority of the iceberg, which is 90% of it. In the same regard, our ego is controlling the 10% of our potential. The rest of our potential is within our authentic selves that the ego does not have a relationship with. So that part of ourselves is completely blocked off, which is a choice. It is a conscious choice on our parts. It's not that we don't have any access to it. We make a conscious choice, and it is very difficult, okay? But we ultimately make the choice of not wanting to have that relationship with it. And when we give the keys to the ego and allow it to project all these anxieties and fears into our everyday lives, it takes control, because what the ego loves to do is, quote unquote, put your life in order. It likes to organize your life, right? So it likes to have some sort of rules and regulations and boundaries and so forth. So it gives you a peace of mind that, hey, I have my life together. This is the right track for me, right? But in reality, the ego is doing the complete opposite. The ego creates chaos. It does not create order. Although it gives you the illusion that it's creating order, it is doing the quite opposite, right? It's feeding into our identity. It is not helping our authentic selves. It is feeding into our identity. And also, the ego is extremely self-contained and self-absorbed, okay? It is extremely limited. So because it is extremely limited, it does not allow you to progress and grow. Unlike the ego, awareness is actually not self-limiting, and it is so vast, it is so evolved, yet it allows you to harness in that energy. I know this may seem a little confusing, but so let me kind of break that down for you. So the ego is very self-restricting. Awareness is very unlimiting. However, when you are able to tap into awareness, you get this laser focus in your life. You get this true clarity that the ego can never truly provide for you, okay? And what the awareness provides for you is true control of your surroundings, true control of your environment, true control of your spirit, okay? And it puts you on the right track. It puts you, it's your guide, okay? Your awareness is your guide. For majority of us, 90% of us, we are constantly using our ego as our guide, right? It helps us build these relationships with people. It helps us be familiar with society as a whole. It helps us get comfortable in life. But because the ego is only looking out for its own survival, it does not want you to get out of your comfort zone so you could progress or build in any sense of the word, okay? So if we're comparing those two, awareness is the one that will always put you on the path to real control. It will put you on the path to power. And even though the ego's in the driver's seat right now, That is what is stopping us from reaching true fulfillment, okay? True happiness. And that is what is ultimately draining our energy. The ego plays a huge role in emotionally and mentally draining us constantly, right? And what awareness does, that it completely flips that. It makes sure that you preserve your energy, it makes sure that you are laser focused, and it makes sure that you could get tasks done, unlike the ego, right? So if you are laser focused, you're going to wake up in the morning and have a real sense of purpose and have a real fresh sense of energy that you didn't have before, because now you're tapping into a different place, because you're no longer tapping into the low base negative realm of the ego. You are playing in a much bigger field with much bigger possibilities that are unlimited. Let's move on to logic. What do we know about logic? In the same regard as control, we know that it gives us a relief knowing that there must be some sort of direct answer to a question, and subjects such as math and science consistently use logic to gain some sort of circumstance or some answer, and we take pride in that, majority of us. Now, someone created a quote, I'm not sure who, but it goes something like this: logic is backwards thinking. Now, for majority of us, this may sound illogical in itself, but I'm going to justify this for you. Now, we have to understand the foundation of logic. Logic is based off of our experience, our past action and reaction and circumstance scenarios that ultimately accumulate over time. And we refer back to that when we are making a current daily decision, and that reminds us. So the ego will cling on to those past experiences, and if the experience was negative, it will assure you to make a different decision so that you don't run into any sort of errors, so to speak. Now, because the ego is so worried about its own survival, it will make sure that you don't make the same mistakes over and over again. So I'm not saying logic is completely backwards, because there's actually a certain way to use logic correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you two examples. The first one is a positive way to use logic that works to our benefits. For instance, you're a mother, you wake up in the morning and you have this innate need to want to feed your children, bathe them, clothe them, take them to school, and so forth, and take care of them. Now, this is not only an innate instinct, but it also has a big play in logic. Now, I'm going to give you an example of logic that is disadvantage. For instance, your house got robbed last night, and you come home and you're so devastated, and the next day you call your friends and you let them know how devastated you are and emotionally distraught you are, and then you tell them that, oh, life is so scary nowadays, you can't trust people, and it creates this sort of paranoia and fear within your spirit and emotionally and mentally, right? So now you could make these decisions based off of this traumatizing experience. Oh, you can't really trust too many people, you always kind of have to watch your back, because today's times are a little bit scarier than many decades or centuries ago, for instance, right? So now what the ego's doing, once again, it's rearing its ugly head to protect you, right? And it is creating this barrier for you not to make similar decisions, or in its case, mistakes, so you don't get hurt, so it doesn't get hurt, okay? Now, again, the ego can play a good role. For instance, if you are in a do or die situation. For instance, you're walking in a parking lot, there is a stranger behind you, and he's walking closer and closer, faster and faster, and your instincts kick in, and your logic and your ego tells you, you know what, you better run, something is going on here. Now, in this regard, yes, you do have to follow these this instinctual but logical steps to move you away from harm. In this regard, your ego will preserve you, okay, because it is a life or death situation. However, because after you got robbed, that example that I was telling you about, because that is no longer here, but your ego is still dwelling on it, that is a major issue, right? And this goes hand in hand with logic. It feeds your mind, the ego feeds your mind, that ultimately the world is a dangerous place. You shouldn't necessarily make friends very quickly. You shouldn't be friendly with people. You shouldn't leave your door unlocked, for instance, and so forth, right? So it creates this immediate sense of emergency. So then you have to ask yourself, am I in a current state of emergency at this moment? The answer is no. Okay, so because the ego creates this sense of alertness and emergency, it completely drains your energy. I'll give you a good analogy of what it's doing. It's like it's making you build this huge castle with no intention of you living there. So what would that do to you? It will physically, emotionally, and spiritually completely drain you. So that's what the ego is great at doing. So what happens is fear recycles these anxious decisions based off of the trauma from the past, and this continues this cycle, and you move forward making these anxious decisions based off of trauma from the past. And what this is doing is that the ego is forcing you to project into the future and dwell into the past, and it's not letting you really take a step forward. Even though we feel like logically we are moving forward each and every day, we're making these decisions that were hopefully are to our advantage, that we are making progress, but ultimately you have to question where this decision making skills are coming from, right? Are they coming from a sense of awareness? Are they coming from your intuition? Or are they coming from the realm that carries a heavy burden like the ego, right? And it's hard to distinguish because we don't have the opportunity to go internally to question these things, to ask ourselves these questions, okay? And so if logic does more damage to us than good, so then what can we replace logic with, right? Intuition is a very organic, natural solution to logic. We were born with intuition. Intuition was there way before our time, way before we were born, and it is the source. It's the portal to all of the information, all of the knowledge, all of the skill we could ever attain in our lifetime and beyond. Okay, it is the one thing that we could actually rely on. So if we want to ultimately be clear-headed and make logical decisions that are truly energy preserving, okay, that are carved in a clear manner, right, that is not fear ego based, right, we have to tap into our awareness, use our intuition, use logic and instinct in certain situations that require it, right? Certain situations require it, and it will use our energy. We should not be using that energy 24/7 all the time to make all these decisions. We should preserve it, harness it, and use it in the correct manner. Now, with that said, I will close up this talk with logic and control. Hope you enjoyed it, and can't wait to see you again very soon.